Well, this morning started, I think, as I came in here to the door, as most days do, as I'm greeting people, and you're seeing people that you haven't seen for a while. I think it's been 4 or 5 weeks since I've been with you, and so the question is often, that common question, that greeting is, well, how are you? And the temptation that I often have, so a bit of self-confession here, is to say busy. But I've been convicted about that because busy is a 4-letter word, quite literally. And but because I think busy is kind of the nature and the general culture and pace of our lives. And I don't know anybody who couldn't say that they're not busy. Everybody I know is busy. So sometimes I actually heard somebody say sometime back, well, busy is just a way for me to say I've got too many important things going on and I'm more important than you, and sort of beating your own chest in front of somebody. And so I try not to say busy. I've tried to use a different 4-letter word, and that word is full, which is in some ways the same, right? Because oftentimes what I mean is my schedule is full, the days are full, the calendar is full. But I'm hoping that the Spirit will be working in me to change my perspective, that I also see that life is full in a good way, hopefully full of joy. We graduated our second child this year from high school, and she's headed off to college this fall, and all the things that go with that make life full. And I'm also full of joy at what's ahead for her. So this idea of busy, what is this all about? Why are we so tempted to say, why are we so busy? I'm beginning to believe the answer of being busy is just code for being exhausted and overwhelmed. That sometimes when we say our schedules and our calendars are full, we actually mean they're too full. There's too much going. I can't keep up. I'm busy, sometimes maybe too busy for this conversation. And I don't want to be busy in that way. I don't want to not be present. So being busy isn't really a badge of honor, but more a cry for help. At least it is for me. So again, some self-confession. And as we're launching this ministry and building a retreat, in large part, it's a response not only from what we experienced, but what we have seen and observed, and that is the busyness and burnout culture and burnout epidemic among ministry people, especially pastors, and especially coming through a pandemic that we did. I think I've shared before, Barna did some surveys, and at one point it was something like 38% of pastors were considering leaving the ministry, not just leaving their church. We all know pastors leave church and then find another call, but leaving the ministry altogether. That number then, some months later, jumped to 43%. And I don't know what the number is at right now, because things have kind of settled in terms of pandemic, and yet pastors are still overwhelmed and on the edge and on the brink of burnout. And their wives are as well. Their families, kids are feeling it. No, kids don't know how to process those things. My own kids, who are teenagers, are processing what it meant to be a family in ministry and what that looks like. And so what does that mean? What are we going to say today? In terms of how to avoid busy culture and how to avoid burnout. Well, I want to talk today about Sabbath, and that is, as I'm defining it today, practicing presence through a rhythm of rest, and hopefully to dispel some of the things that we have come to believe wrongly about Sabbath. Hopefully to help us be drawn to it, and hopefully as you have a new pastor in his family coming, that you will also be advocates for him, his soul care, his Sabbath rest, to keep him from getting too busy. He's going to be busy. He's going to be busy getting to know you, getting to know the area, and leading you and shepherding you, all those kind of things, and his own family. But to how to do it without being on that edge and that brink of burnout, right? We don't need to see you in a few years back in this process again, right? He's a young man. Hopefully he'll be able to serve the Lord here for a number of years in a healthy, sustainable, thriving way. And so today I want to talk about Sabbath and why Sabbath, because I think when we talk about busyness and that being overwhelmed in that pace of life and the pace of our culture, there has to be a better way. There has to be a more sustainable pace. There's got to be some way to run while not running out of breath. Right? I know what this means, right? So again, we've been in the last couple of days, we have the smoke and the terrible air quality. You know, that's because the north is on fire, right? Canada is literally burning, and we're feeling the effects on our own lungs. And I don't know how many of you have actually felt it. I've been working at times and been outside, and the air quality is pretty high. Not good quality, but that number is pretty high in terms of poor air quality. And I found I had a little anxiety in my chest, almost like my heart was not healthy. And I was at work one day, and I was going out to make a cut on a saw, and I said to him, I said, "Hey, just to let you know, my heart's beating a little irregularly." And he's 31, and so to him, I'm ancient at 50, and he's kind of freaked. I'm like, "Okay, I'm just letting you know." And then I looked, my watch gives me all these updates, one being the air quality, and I thought, oh, well, that maybe is it. And it was another time, similar kind of thing, but at home. Air quality's bad, and I'm feeling that kind of anxious in my heart, it affects us, right? And so I went for a run with my daughter one day. We went out to Fiume, and it wasn't early in the morning, it was already probably 66, 68 degrees, working its way up to 70 degrees, which is warmer than I like to run in. I'm let's run in February kind of guy. And so we're out there at Fiume, and it was pretty good, but first, and we're doing the loop, and so it's a little over 5 miles to do that loop, and we're about halfway, and man, I hit a wall. And I'm like, what is going on? I didn't think I was this out of shape, and part of it was trying to keep up with my 16-year-old daughter, so there was a bit of that. But she's like, I'm struggling. We were just both sweating. Well, she had to get from there to another thing, so we couldn't just walk the rest of it. We had to just keep pushing. So we kept pushing, got to the end, and just oh, man, we are this was tough. Again, look at my watch because I don't know, it's a time teller and truth teller, I guess. And air quality, the number was way up, 120 something. It's like, well, there you go, because it just takes that much more labor to run while not just running out of breath. Well, I think that's what we're looking for, some pace as we do life, as we live, as we follow Jesus, to do it in a way, in our culture, in our setting, and to be able to run without running out of breath. Pastors who are called into a space ought to be able to lead and to shepherd without burning out. It happens. Sometimes that's from wounds, and sometimes those wounds are self-inflicted. So we as pastors have to learn about soul care and self-care. But there are other things that we have to be able to say no to. And I think Sabbath is one of these things. It's a better way. The reality is we all live with rhythms. Right? We live our life with rhythms. The calendar dictates it. Life dictates it. We live with rhythms, though generally we don't actually establish them intentionally. Kind of fall into them. So the opposite really of being intentional isn't just unintentional, it's being careless. Right? Because unintentional sounds like I'm just kind of it's somebody else's fault. But if I'm careless, it's because I'm not being careful with. So observing Sabbath is an intentional rhythm of rest that we can build into our lives. The design that God has given us. My history of Sabbath is generally one, this idea of kind of an oppressive law. It's a command. It's one of the 10 commandments, right? So it's observe the Sabbath. That's how I heard it growing up, this kind of heavy, oppressive thing that was held over you. You're to observe the Sabbath, or else. That was always the kind of implication. If you don't, then these kind of things happen. So much so that I remember as a kid, my parents had, I don't know if we were given 3 cherry trees, but from somebody, and I planted them, and only one of them made it, and somebody from church said, well, did you plant them on a Sunday? that idea that if you did work on a Sunday, it was a Dutch community, so we didn't do a lot of things on Sunday, and that was kind of the idea of it. And if you did this on Sunday, then well, that's why they died. Now, strictly speaking, Sunday is not the Sabbath, right? Biblically, the Sabbath would be Saturday. But the idea is the same. Like, if this is a day of rest, you're not to do any work. That was a time, restaurants were closed, grocery stores were closed. There were so many things you just couldn't do. So this idea that Sabbath was this law, this burden, and that carried over to us. And it is not that. I'll say out front, and we'll see more what it is, but it is not that. Some of that comes from Exodus 20, right, where we have the Ten Commandments. And after we get these first three about honoring the Lord, we get Exodus 20, verse 8. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor, do all your work. And the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your livestock, and the sojourners within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them. And he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." Now, first of all, that word holy is repeated right at the beginning. Keep it holy, and at the end, God made it holy. It's that Sabbath day. So it's holy. Holy, by the way, does not just mean sinless. It's not just without sin. It's set apart. It's sanctified. It's set apart as from the other days. God set it apart. It is set apart for a sacred and specific purpose. Walter Brueggemann, the Old Testament scholar, talks about this passage. We get here. He says, well, why was it so important? Why did this make it into the Ten Commandments? Why is God instructing his people to observe the Sabbath? Why is he saying 6 days you labor and not the seventh? Is it just because they need to be reminded about the creation story? No, they're coming out of 400 years of slavery where they worked nonstop. And in fact, not just as slaves, but then the whole culture was about productivity. Well, how productive were the Egyptians? Have you seen the pyramids? Right? They're still trying to figure out how they made these things. Moses likely was a foreman on the job, by the way, which is fantastic to think about. But this whole idea of productivity and do more. In fact, it got so bad, right, because when Israel started to be a threat, well, now you have to do more with less, which if you're in the healthcare industry, you know what that's about, right? Or any industry these days, do more with less. Now you get to make bricks without straw. But we want you to make just as many bricks. Right? So this idea that Israel is coming out of an enslaved history where they had to be productive, where they had to do, where their worth was based on their work. And God says, not so anymore. You're to rest. I set up a model. This day is holy. Do your work on 6 days. Nobody works the seventh. Do it as rest. Do it to recognize that your worth is not based in your work. Do it to recognize that the work that does not get done, I'll take care of. One of the operating values that I have is this idea of I define God's sovereignty as God is always at work, everywhere, all the time, to work all things to reconcile to himself for his glory. God is always at work, everywhere, all the time. So God, I believe, took the seventh day and rested, and I'm not sure that he's rested since. Not that things are effort for him. I think God is always at work. And so when I take off as a Sabbath, I can trust that God is still working. God is still accomplishing. When I take a day off, the earth doesn't stop spinning on its axis, thankfully. If we all vacationed on that day to the same place, we wouldn't tilt the earth off its axis and stop the cosmos from existing. We wouldn't stop things from being fruitful. So God is always at work. So we have this idea that the Sabbath is holy. It is set apart. And it is to be set apart. It is to be honored. But not as this overarching law from us. In fact, Jesus clarifies that in Mark 2. Mark 2, 23 through 28. One Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields. And as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees were saying to him, look, why are they doing what's lawful, not lawful on the Sabbath? So they're remembering Exodus 20, right? The Pharisees being those ones who knew the word, who knew the law, and saw themselves as the enforcers of it. Jesus said to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but for the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. So Jesus uses this argument of appealing to David, which is interesting because Jesus doesn't have to appeal to anybody but himself. But for the sake of the Pharisees, he's appealing to the story of David. And then he said to them, verse 27, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man, now he's referring to himself, is Lord even of the Sabbath. Jesus reminded them that the Sabbath wasn't put in place as this thing that you had to. It's holy, but not as like you have to honor it and take care of it for its sake. It is there for your sake. What does that mean? If the Sabbath is there for mankind, for people, rather than people for Sabbath, it's a gift. It's a gift given, not something that's to be a burden. I don't know about it. I grew up with the whole idea of Sabbath and in any of these laws as being a burden. A burden I knew that I couldn't handle. A burden I knew I couldn't live up under. And so what do? Like, oh yeah, we kind of rest, but man, there's just so much to do. And the older I get, it seems like the more there is to do. There's no end to the things that can be done. You ask me how things are going with the retreat. I don't know that I've made any progress since the last time I saw you. I mean, literally, I don't think I'm being lazy. There are just so many other things pressing in that I haven't been able to give it time. I hate admitting that. I hate confessing that. I think, man, I guess I should just do more, try harder. Well, that level of morality is not gospel. Nobody finds their way into eternity by doing more and trying harder. We all only find our way through Jesus. Drawn in by the Spirit. Drawn in by Jesus who reveals the Father. And we see his love manifest in Jesus. So, is there more to do in the retreat? Yep. Do we have buildings up? Nope. In fact, the one building we have, right, it's a little tiny cabin on a trailer, right, that we had kind of set. And then I looked out one day and I've noticed this red pine that's about 24 inches in diameter is leaning that way. I looked one day, I'm like, I think it's leaning more. Red pines are pretty, they're strong, they're hardy, but they're heavy. And I'm like, I don't have the insurance yet for this little, for any of this stuff. So I had to hook up the tiny trailer and I spent a day and I moved it and then I dropped the red pine and cleaned it up and all that. And I feel like I took a step backwards. That was already done, but those things, it's going to continue to happen. We have a wooded property. It's going to continue to happen. There's always more to do. It is not Sabbath, like, you got to have this. It's there for you. And it's not when the work's done you take the Sabbath. You take the Sabbath regularly. On the seventh day, hey, guess what? Work's done. You're going to stop. So Jesus says, it is, yes, holy, but it's also a gift. And so we take it in the Exodus 20 passage referred to it. Jesus is definitely referring back to it. But we go all the way back to Genesis 1, and we see that this inauguration of Sabbath. Now I want to look at Genesis 1. I'm going to read the end of chapter 1, verses 27 through the end, and then the first few verses of chapter 3, because I think we need to see these two things juxtaposed. So Genesis 1. And yes, I know that this is familiar, but I want us to hear it in this way, in this context. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female. He created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. That's the work, right? That's do stuff. And this is the stuff you have to do. And God said, behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that's on the face of all the earth, every tree with seed in its fruit. You should have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I've given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made. Behold, it was very good. And it was evening, and it was morning, the sixth day. Chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done. He rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Mankind is created on what day? Day 6. God gives them what? A mandate. Here's the things you're to do. Be fruitful, multiply, take care of it, all this, right? What's the first thing he gives them? A day off. Seventh day. The first thing they get after the mandate is not a 9 to 5. The first thing they get is a day to rest. You know who else was resting that day? God. Guess what they did together? I have no clue. But it was together. I'm convinced those moments God is spending with his creation. They spent the seventh day together. We are designed for work and rest. So when I talk about rest, we've talked about this before in terms of silence and solitude. When we talk about rest in terms of Sabbath, it isn't that we're to just not do anything. It isn't that rest is what we're to do. It also isn't that just, work is what we're to do. Which, I believe, we live in a society at a time that feels like work is your worth. Why? Because the more you work, the more you get, the more you have. If the more you have, the more important you are. The problem with that is somebody always has more. The problem with it is culture always says you need to have more, while also whispering underneath, and it will never be enough. Well, that sounds like a really bad setup for life. That I would always work to have more, but it would never be satisfying. Except when we fall into culture and society, that's exactly what we're doing. We're finding work and work. We're designed for both. We have them right here at the beginning. Justin McRoberts has just recently written a book called Sacred Strides. And it's called that because he uses the imagery of running for a lot of his chapters and stories. But a primary premise of the book is my natural posture is not work, nor is my natural posture rest. My natural posture is belovedness. Both work and rest spring from my belovedness and return me to it. That idea, the truth really of belovedness is worth holding on to. We're going to kind of keep that in the back of our mind. But I think what we see implied in the seventh day, by the way, Adam, if you don't know it's the seventh day, they do it as the first day, right? What we see is belovedness. What did they experience when they were with God on that day? No doubt it's belovedness. No doubt it's recognizing that they are image bearers. That they're not working. They're not going to do stuff that day. The very first day of humankind's existence, they rested. And then they worked. So it's not we worked so that we rest. But it's from our rest and from our sense of belovedness, then we can work. And oftentimes it's in that rest and in that pattern of rest that we are reminded of our belovedness. We're reminded that we are image bearers. The Imago Dei, created in the image of God. And meant to enjoy time with Him. When we don't prioritize this pattern of pausing, a rhythm of rest, we carelessly, there's that word again, carelessly condition ourselves to cope through unhealthy and often addictive behaviors. Think of it. Think of your own life. little self-confession without too much exposure is I find when I'm trying to cope, oftentimes there's some almost level of addictive behavior. It's because I'm trying to escape the reality of being overwhelmed. Whether it's binging a show on Netflix, whether it's the mindless scrolling on my phone just to find out what everybody else is doing or saying or what you put. A lot of times, that's not healthy rest. That's a negative, unhealthy behavior and coping mechanism that I'm trying to escape the busyness, the overwhelm, the rush, but I'm not actually doing it in a healthy way. And that happens when I don't prioritize pausing, when I don't prioritize rest. Many of our coping mechanisms are false constructs we create just in attempts to deal with the busyness and unhealthy rhythms. We don't actually make things better. I don't actually take an hour to take a nap that might help, or just to be quiet, spend it with the Lord. I don't plan on spending an hour on scrolling through Instagram, but here I am. I know I'm the only one who does that, so again, some self-confession. And that's not even worse than it. When we look at addictive behaviors, addicts, and we can go drugs, alcohol, food, shopping, sex, any of those addictions, right? We choose at some point, and then they become addictions and we're now enslaved and we can't unchoose them, right? And that's why we have 12-step programs and all these things to try to rescue people out of these patterns of unhealthy behavior, unhealthy coping mechanisms that we chose, rhythms that we didn't know we were forming. Neural patterns now in our brain, and pathways that have to be retrained and reprogrammed because we've been trying to cope with all the stuff, the busyness, the overwhelm. Kelly Fabian wrote a book recently called Holy Vulnerability. In it, she says, we can tell that these coping practices are unhealthy because they never lead us into true nourishment in life, which ultimately is trust in, dependence on God. My Instagram feed doesn't generally lead me closer to God. I've tried to pick some people who, and some voices that do draw me to some things, and I have to stop and meditate. But the mindless scrolling, right? See your chiropractor and never ask him, hey, can you just work on my thumb? It's just really sore. You know why it's sore, right? This is why mine gets sore. This is what I'm doing. Just scrolling. Just scrolling through all the feed. So, oh, look at ESPN. What's going on today? No, we do this with different things. Ruth Haley Barton, in her fantastic work, Sacred Rhythms, says, if we do not allow for a rhythm of rest in our overly busy lives, illness becomes our Sabbath. Our pneumonia, our cancer, our heart attack, our accidents create Sabbath for us. She's not saying that these are the consequences. She's not saying, oh, you have cancer because. But she's saying, if you don't stop, right? If you won't stop, these times when you're sick, that becomes the only Sabbath you know. Right? You ever look forward to a head cold? Not really. But if it means a sick day, maybe. Because we need to stop. One of the unhealthy coping mechanisms, ironically, right, is actually work. We cope with work by work. I don't know what else to do, so I guess I'll do more. The idol of productivity that we see in our culture, right, this idol can keep us from resting well. And even when we do try to rest, then we tend to do it in a way that can hurt more than help. So I think sometimes we do things and say, oh, I'm just gonna veg out for a while and watch a show. That's not necessarily active, healthy rest. It's just kind of avoiding healthy rest, but I don't know what else to do, so I'm just gonna fill my mind with, I'm just gonna numb the pain, right? Again, addictive behavior, right? numbing things. Being productive, working hard, diligence, they're not in themselves wrong. In fact, I think we're called to do those things. We're meant to. And since the fall, we know in our work there are thorns and thistles. Even though productivity, working hard, diligence aren't wrong, they are not also everything. They are not enough. They're not all that we're designed for. In this consumer-driven society, markets that say, again, we have to have more and it will never be enough, we end up getting pushed into longer work days and endless work weeks. Only interrupted either by the sickness and sick days or exhausting vacations. You know what I mean, right? You spend a week exhausting yourself so that you can go on vacation. And you fit everything in, because you have to, because this is the time you have to do it. And then you get back, and what is the first thing you say? I can really use a vacation. Right? You need a vacation from the vacation because we slam it all in, because this is the time like we have to do all the things. We have to fit it all in. We always are. We have an eye on escape. An escape from this, an escape from and so Sabbath really is an exit ramp. It's an off-ramp from that whole thing. And it's designed to be built into our lives in a regular way. Most of you, if you get vacation time, you make sure to at least take a week's vacation each year. A week at one time. You know, sometimes the other days are scheduled here, but you try to get at least a week. I have a friend, a pastor in California, who's on sabbatical right now. And he said, and he's almost my age. We went to at least a year of seminary together. And he's on sabbatical. He said, this will be the first time in my ministry life that I've had more than a week off at a time. It's over 20 years. I mean, that's not healthy for someone in ministry, right? More than 7 days in a row. So Sabbath is this exit ramp. Rich Villodas is a pastor out in New York City. He wrote The Deeply Formed Life. He says, Sabbath keeping is a weekly 24-hour period of unhurried delight with no have to or ought to's, resulting in deep rest and renewal. Because we experience fatigue of the body, we know that one, right? We experience fatigue of the mind, we certainly know that one. We also experience fatigue of the soul, which I think we know, but we can't always put a finger on it. That's what's going on. So Sabbath keeping, again, is a weekly 24-hour period of unhurried delight. Man, whatever, nobody's had time for that. Unhurried delight. This is not Disney World, right? Disney World, you got to see all the things, get in all the lines, do it, ride all the rides fast, because then if there's a couple that you or your kids like, you got to do again. You fill it all up. Disney's fine, but it's not unhurried delight. I live around the corner from Summer Breeze Campground, and that place fills up in the summer. And I'm hoping that those people, a lot of them from town here, a lot of them not from very far away, I'm hoping that they're experiencing, while I'm driving by, dropping kids, busy dropping kids from one thing to another, as they're sitting around their campfires, I hope they're experiencing unhurried delight. I like that. I like that about campfires. We get together with some guys and I'll invite them out and say, hey, we're going to do a fire. And start around 7. Sometimes we go to 11, 12, 1 a.m. Depends how deep the conversation gets. It's unhurried delight. The thing about fires is, you've got to have good dry wood, right? You got to have the fire going, and it's got to be able to combust. The thing that you need, you often don't think about, but this is why as you're sitting around a fire, right? If you're a guy who's got the poker, or you find your own, or whatever, when you're tending the fire the whole time. Why? Because there's got to be space between the logs for it to keep burning. So as they burn down on the coals and it gets out in the ash, you can you can suffocate a fire, right? Throw on too many papers at once or something. You can suffocate, or just let the logs, there's got to be space between the logs. Sabbath is space between the logs. It's margin. Ruth Haley Barton also said, read this one, the point of Sabbath is to honor our need for a sane rhythm of work and rest. So it's not just one or the other, right? She's called to both. It's to honor the body's need for rest, the spirit's need for replenishment, and the soul's need to, hear that word is again, delight itself in God for God's own sake. It begins with a willingness to acknowledge the limits of our humanness. Take steps to live more graciously within the order of things. So when we practice Sabbath, we acknowledge we are finite. And guess what? That's part of being an image bearer. You're not God. I'm not God. Whew. Feels good, doesn't it? You can't control it. You can't make it all happen. You don't have to. If at the end of the week your work isn't done, I got news for you. It'll be there next week. And the things that we don't accomplish, we can trust God to accomplish on our day off. There's times that He does work when we set it down. He's always working. So the last passage, Matthew 11. This one's not strictly about Sabbath, but I think that's the heart of this, the heart behind it. Matthew 11:28, Jesus' invitation. Because I want you to hear it, because I need to hear it, because I need to be reminded of this. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Jesus' invitation to rest is from a place of compassion, a place acknowledging we are His beloved, a place acknowledging what happened that first day after Adam and Eve were created. Unhurried delight with God. To be reminded that they are beloved. Sabbath is more than just rest for our bodies and minds, and emotions, and souls. It is about resting in Christ. To take a Sabbath. A Sabbath is really a tithe of time. Right? When we give, we say, now, most of the time when we give, could I use that money? Absolutely. There's bills to pay. There's things to save up for. I just had a refrigerator breakdown. Guess what? Guess when refrigerators break down? Not in the winter when you can store things in your garage. That's when furnaces break down. Refrigerators break down in the summer when you got to find a lot of ice and a lot of coolers and try to figure out a way to keep it cold until you get a refrigerator. By the way, there's not many places in town that actually carry them. You're going to have to order it, wait a week. Or at least a few days till you can get on the delivery schedule. So there's always things that my money could go to, but when we tithe, we give money because I'm entrusting God, saying, I'm giving this to you, not because God needs it, but I'm expecting Him to multiply it and use it in some way to bless a guy with a retreat, maybe. Thank you again. But I'm giving it to God. God, I trust you, and I know that you will provide. When I give a day as a Sabbath, I'm entrusting God with that time. God, there's more to do. You see my list. You see my wife's list for me. There's more to do. But I'm going to trust you. I'm not going to necessarily get more time, but to somehow multiply my efforts or to make these things happen. It doesn't just go away. I don't know how it works, but it's designed and I trust you. And so it's resting in Christ, not just with Him, but in Him. Our rest is not only away from work and exhaustion, it is rest with Jesus. Skye Jethani wrote a book called With, and he talks about different postures we have with God, and one of them that we have is our life for God. You think, oh God, aren't you blessed? No, because I'm giving my life for you. But that oftentimes flows out of my work is my worth. We're not designed to just give our lives for God. We're designed to give our life and have our lives with Him. spent with him. Sabbath calls us back to that. Sabbath is something holy, sacred, a gift for us to set apart to God and to set apart with him. It's a gift in which we're reminded about the most true thing of us. This is the most true thing I believe. Not that we are broken. I do not believe that to be the most true thing. I think the most true thing of us is that we are beloved. Before the fall, they are beloved and they spend time with God. Most true change, not our brokenness, not our need to work, not even our need for us, but our belovedness. So I need to be reminded. I need to be reminded on a daily basis. On a regular basis. So Sabbath is this regular opportunity to be reminded of our belovedness. We set time aside for unhurried delight with God. The way that I know that I'm not practicing Sabbath this is a harsh metric. And again, some self-confession. The way that I know that I'm not practicing Sabbath is I don't delight in the Lord. Most of the time it's just because I'm too dang busy. So Sabbath is not this law burden. It's a gift. Are you going to do it on Saturday? Are you going to do it on Sunday? Maybe get Wednesdays off. I don't know. But we got to start to figure it out. There has to be a healthier way to run without running out of breath. To live in step with the Spirit. To model to our culture and our world that it's worth pausing and being reminded who we are. What I find is when I'm reminded of my belovedness, I'm also reminded of yours. That's pretty necessary when it comes to loving my neighbor. God, you are good, better than we can fathom, kinder and more patient and more tender. You are near, closer than we're aware, never far off. Always inviting. Come to me. I will give you rest. In fact, God, you are our rest. Thank you. Thank you for all that you have accomplished, for all that you are accomplishing and will accomplish and do so that we do not have to do it. Help us to trust you in this way. Help us to experience moments of unhurried delight. For our hearts to expand with the reality of our belovedness, that you call us your beloved sons and daughters. We love you. Thank you for this time, for this space, for your word, for your great love for us. Through Jesus we pray. Amen.